Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Good Employment Chatter, the podcast of the Good Employment Charter. You see what we did there? I'm delighted to be joined by Councillor Bev Craig, who's the leader of Manchester City Council, but also the portfolio holder for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority for the Economy Portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, some people have other hobbies. You know.
And here you are.
Absolutely.
That fills your day, I'm sure, Bev. Thanks very much for joining us. And we're recording this at the beginning of Good Employment Week this year, so we'll come back to some of the issues around Good Employment Week and particularly the Employment Rights Bill later on, no doubt. But Bev, we use this kind of conversation to dig a little bit behind the surface initially, to find out a little bit more about you, about your leadership journey, and then we'll come on to the stuff.
Okay.
So the first question we always ask is, what was your first job?
Well, I probably shouldn't really tell you about the babysitting that I did from 11 until 13 when I was probably looking after too many kids. So my first job, after a brief stint at an Indian takeaway at 13, just after my 14th birthday, I started working for a Chinese restaurant down the road, and worked there from I was 14 until I was 16 for the grand sum of £3 an hour. That made me think I was rich.
Yeah.
And my job was essentially to carry trays, take orders, but by 15 I was running the bar.
Right.
So it was good fun. And then when I turned 16 and I could get a proper job, I upgraded myself and went and joined the world of retail.
Okay, we'll come back to that. But the service industries, the hospitality industries, tough ones to work in.
Yeah, I think so. I guess, I don't know, it wasn't uncommon where I was growing up that you would be working, I don't know, I guess by 14, 15, so I was probably doing 3 nights a week and a weekend. It would be quite common that you'd have a job kind of at 14, 15, so it sort of seemed fairly normal. But I suppose anywhere that wants to employ kids, you've probably got a limited amount, and it wasn't until you got your national insurance number at 16 that you could work in a proper shop. So, yeah, when I look back, I don't think, I think it was good for the money, but there's probably a lot in that shaped me in terms of what employers thought they could get away with, how they thought they could treat you. And particularly when there's lots of people there that would do that job, there was lots of people that didn't stick around very often.
And this was in Belfast, of course.
Yeah, so it's probably about 8 miles outside of Belfast. It was actually a wee place called Carrickfergus.
Okay, yeah.
With the Chinese restaurant that existed there.
Is it still there?
It's still there. I think it's probably clearly changed ownership a few times, but probably one of these reasons that it's not my takeaway choice, but that's probably only because I ate it 3 or 4 nights a week for 2 years.
Okay.
So yeah, probably had
interesting. But then tell me about the retail stuff, because I think that could be interesting, couldn't it?
Oh, you just want to hear about my waistcoats.
I do.
You do.
I do.
So yes, I'm not ashamed to admit it. My first retail job, running up to Christmas, it was for Toys R Us. And at the time they were known for the beautiful attire, and I donned a Geoffrey the Giraffe, for anyone that remembers Geoffrey the Giraffe from Toys R Us, a Geoffrey the Giraffe waistcoat. But I mean that was, I still remember it to this day, in the run up to Christmas, grown men fighting each other over toys, really high pressured.
And were you on the shop floor?
Yeah, mixture of shop floor and checkout. Right. And then so I stayed there for a bit, and then probably the job that I stuck with longest before uni was I worked for TK Maxx, and I actually loved that. You're not meant to do product placement, but as an employer, it was in the centre of Belfast. Probably for the first time, I got to meet kind of all sorts of different people, mostly people older than me. Worked there sort of from about 16 and a half all the way through, and then when I came to university, they actually transferred me over to the Manchester store.
Wow.
To give me a bit of extra security. So kind of it's interesting how stuff like that shapes you. But I think for me, particularly in the summer holidays where you'd be working 2 jobs, kind of I'd have my retail job and then took a bit of call centre work before coming to university. It was all about sort of saving up and getting to kind of save my money to come to Manchester.
And goodness, call centre work's not easy either.
No, but I did when I was at university. I worked my way through.
Was that for a utility or a retail or?
Oh God, I've to be honest, I'd worked for them all in the end. So when I was back in Belfast, it was for Amazon.
Okay.
So this would have been, it's just before I went to uni. So The summer of 2002 and then 2003, just as Amazon were starting to take off. I think they were still in the territory of mostly selling books, mostly online. But
it's amazing in 20 years what they've done,
it's
isn't
incredible. It's incredible. Quite kind of old-fashioned. You would have spent a lot of time trying to teach people, like, well, this is how you use the internet. No, there isn't a shop, and remembering that. And then I guess it just meant when I came to uni, I'd already been working for quite a few years. So it's fair to say probably worked my way through most of Manchester's call centres to get myself through uni.
That's fascinating. I mean, we I think, from the Charter, look at call centres as a prime target, particularly post-COVID and the cost of living crisis. Being a call centre is no longer the case. You're at home answering calls, and sometimes it might be quite abusive.
Yeah.
Really difficult work.
I mean, it probably is what's equipped me for politics. So if you can take people kicking off at you in a shop, you can take people unnecessarily swearing at you on the phone in a call centre, you can handle a knocking on
and
someone's
did your politics
front door.
come out during that? Were you part of the USDA? The
No, gosh, no. So I didn't grow up particularly political at all. Probably very much sort of small p politics. I guess coming from Northern Ireland, there's an element of tribalism and religion really that sort of put you off. And I think so one of the things that really challenged my perception. So I grew up in kind of a very traditional kind of working class Protestant loyalist estate, and it was actually when I came out as gay. So accidentally a bit too early, so probably wasn't advisable to come out before your 15th birthday at the time. Run into a bit of trouble along the way. But as I got involved in sort of more of the social justice stuff in Belfast, it was the SDLP, it was Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin were the only party that would even speak to us about LGBT issues. It was a nationalist community that they were most vocal in support. And that for me really probably challenged kind of my sense of how you've been brought up.
Sure.
Because suddenly the people that raised you didn't particularly want you, but people that you'd been taught were the other were more supportive.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, I continued with the social justice, the activism, came to university, did a lot of LGBT rights, anti-racism stuff. But it wasn't until my first proper job after uni, when I got involved in Unison, my trade union, that I found the Labour Party and joined the Labour Party in 2009, just as everyone else was leaving.
So that transition from Belfast into Manchester, that I'm trying to imagine, that must have been almost like a weight off your shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, so it's fair to say that I'd never been to Manchester before I decided I was coming here for university. I'd seen it on the TV. I guess there's a bit of, there's an arrogance of youth, isn't there? So, I was one of those, what was it, my university lecturer eventually called me, a frustrating student. So I always came out with good results, but was maybe a little bit kind of a touch of not as hardworking and diligent as you could be along the way. So I had some decent A-levels at my disposal. So picked kind of universities outside of Oxbridge that I thought I could get into.
What sort of school did you go to in Belfast then?
So I went to Belfast High.
Okay.
So state school, but the grammar system was still in place and still is actually to this day in Northern Ireland. And it was actually, I don't know, there's people that stick in your mind. I had a teacher at primary school. He was called Mr. Gibney. And when people, you remember, don't you, the people that looked out for you, or the people that sort of pointed at you and said, you've got something.
Sure.
And at the time, I had no friends, massively picked on, dead shy, a bit too clever for my own good, and against kind of the I suppose the want, actually, of my parents. He entered me in for the 11 plus, and we concocted that if I passed, would have to kind of come up with my parents and kind of, but in the end they were massively supportive, kind of got on board with it.
Proud.
Absolutely. So went there. But yeah, meant I had some good A-levels to choose from. So saw Manchester on the TV. A mixture of Man United and queer as folk, two things you don't normally mix together.
Yeah.
And then rocked up in Manchester in September 2003 and never left.
And tell me about that link to Unison then. How did that come about?
So I, after university, was on a graduate scheme. and joined a local government graduate scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working in Blackburn with Darwin,
Yeah.
a council at the time. Ironically,
When was this?
2003. Sorry, no, that was when I went to university. So this was 2008 when I graduated.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had this poor soul who was given me to look after, with line management responsibilities. A chap called Tom Stannard, who I've not long ago appointed as my chief executive. So
How things come round, eh?
funny, innit? But so I was in Blackburn. I was doing a lot of work at the time in the equalities team, cohesion. Had got more involved in the young member side of Unison. And it was probably what ultimately drove me towards politics. So, if you think about that 2008 period, you're still seeing the prominence of the BNP kind of as they were moving towards the European elections. We had some far-right councillors up in Darwin at the time. I'd got myself into a wee spot of bother protesting against the BNP that they didn't really take to. And it was my union that kind of came to my defence.
Okay.
So I got a bit more involved in them. I was doing a sort of national young members conference stuff. I'd been involved in all of that, and they said, "Well, you've got a lot to say for yourself. Have you never thought about kind of joining a political party?" And I'm like, "Well, we're not really." And if I'm honest, kind of sounds a bit harsh, but I was enjoying the good side of university rather than the student politics side of university. Didn't really sort of find much in common with some of the Labour students at the time, so sort of swerved clear. But I think for me it was that risk of Nick Griffin running in the European elections in the Northwest that made me think, do you know what, actually, kind of get involved. You can't really sit on the sidelines. And so in the dying days of the Labour government, when everyone else was leaving the Labour Party, I thought, okay, fair enough, I'm going to give this a crack.
Fascinating. We had a few weeks ago, and we'll have our podcast probably after years, Helen Pankhurst here. And we're talking about the polarisation of society right now and what her predecessors would have made of it and how they would have responded. And very different responses. The counteraction of let's do what they do on the other side, or finding a way in the middle. Where do you find yourself in that?
So I think when I was younger, I was certainly much more in the kind of direct action, sort of radical space.
Yeah.
And I think, when I was at university, I ended up chairing and running an international LGBT youth organisation. And that took me all over Europe. It took me into conflict with right-wing governments at the time. I've been in pride marches where people have thrown rocks at us, or my favourite, I think it was a mixture of Poland and Latvia, where they'd put rocks in poo and throw poo at you as you were marching. So I certainly sort of had a bit of that. I think, I suppose as I've got more involved in politics, like I've chosen a democratic route, haven't I? So I think there's something for me that so much of today's frustration, I think, comes from people feeling like they're not being heard. That I think politics has got a responsibility not just to act, but to listen and then to act. And I think we've lost a little bit in society of the ability to fiercely hold and defend your own views and your own values and hear something that you disagree with at the same time. And I think until you can hear something you disagree with, you can't begin to challenge it. So I think politicians have to be conviction lads. I'm certainly in that camp. We're all here with a social justice and a moral job to do. But I think we're not in an era where the public need righteousness. They need people, that are coming from the right place, but they're prepared to listen and have some of those hard conversations, because you don't diffuse some of the tensions that we've got in society unless you're actually able to listen to where people are coming from. And I do think at times I feel there's a class element to some of that, because growing up, kind of the communities that I'm from, people speak in a certain way, and that's very different perhaps to maybe some of the middle class kind of conversations that I have, that sometimes people are a bit more frustrated, they're a bit more direct and a little bit more rough around the edges in what they want to say. They don't always use the right words, but when you can judge what intent is coming from somebody, then I think you can have a proper conversation. And I think, when we see where some of this tension and frustration has come from, you think about Brexit. That wasn't just about Brexit. That was people that had never been given like the ability to answer yes or no on a basic question for a generation. So the no wasn't just about Europe, it wasn't just about immigration. It was, well, I can say something and you follow up on it.
What informed that deeper understanding of your approach to your political leadership?
I think for me it's kind of a mixture of sort of feeling like you've grown up on the outside without a lot of people that look or sound like you, that kind of you feel listened to, I think is part of it. But then I also think kind of the more you get out and the more you talk to Manchester people about the things that actually matter to them and the things that drive them, the more disconnected they are to the stuff that you hear in the newspapers. So I think there is an element of reality that comes from some of that. Some of it's through experience, on some of those big issues when people feel like they've been misheard or misunderstood. But I think the other thing is just a principle, really, that I think it's easy for people to say that the public are disengaged from politics, but people have never had more of a view on everything. They might not call it politics, but they have views. And I think if we don't respond to the times, an era of social media where people are constantly giving their views, I think it's a different style that's needed for a different era.
So I've heard you speak a number of times on these issues, and one of the words that you use a lot is dignity. So what does that mean for you when you're working with Manchester people? How do you measure that dignity? What is it?
So I think one of the reasons that I talk a lot about dignity is that I think so there's a risk, isn't there, when you're trying to fix all that's wrong with society, including some of those real structural problems that's been there for a very, very long time and often for generations. There's a risk if you don't get it right that it's preachy or it's patronising. And the example that I always use is how we talk about poverty. Because I didn't grow up knowing that we were poor. Nobody ever mentioned that we were poor or we lived in poverty. I'll make little jokes about it. Like I thought every kid took food home from the Harvest Festival as well as taking food there. Or, every church used to bring you presents at Christmas in the form of food hampers. But on our estate, we didn't know we were poor. We thought we were normal. But if I was a policy paper or if I was a professional, I would be writing about the disadvantaged. I probably would use words like the underclass or, all sorts of really, I think, undignified language in many of our communities are the majority of people. So I think language and attitude is part of it. But I also think kind of understanding what makes a good life, and we don't politically talk enough about what makes a good life. And what's a good life for me now in a fairly sort of middle of the road, middle class life existence is very different to what my mum and dad would want as a good life. So I think there's an element of that. But I think the other element when I talk about dignity is around feeling respected and valued, all of that around your life choices. And some of that can be your career, so it could be when we talk about, a vocational or a technical path versus a university path, making everyone feel that they're equal. Or it could be around how we frame services that don't just do to people all the time in a way that disempowers. So for me, it's around empowering people, it's listening, and it's enabling them to live a good quality life with enough money, a good roof over their heads, and a good job that can give them fulfilment, that doesn't hold them back and doesn't make them
And that's a challenge for Greater Manchester, isn't it? Because of the scale of inequalities that we're still struggling with, despite the growth that we're seeing in the city region, because that's something that seems structural, it's almost intransigent. I've been here since 1981 in different guises, and the city's moved tremendously at that time, unbelievable. But that still doggedly sticks to the city, the levels of poverty and inequality.
No, completely, and I think from my perspective, it's one of the things that it's easy, isn't it, to say that, well, Manchester's had its turn, let's just spread it out to everywhere else. Manchester city centre's had its turn. Manchester as a local authority is still the most deprived in Greater Manchester. We have more kids living in poverty in Manchester than kids that live in Oldham. So it's things like that really have to be the driving force around what we do. I think how our economy is structured, though, you know, when we stopped making stuff in the north of England, it meant that we relied heavily on the service sector, and we've not quite shaken that off yet. You know, and it's probably one of the things for me when we talk about bringing new jobs in, making sure there's pathways for Greater Manchester people to be able to get into those jobs, I think is really important. But it's also, you know, I was having a good chat actually with some colleagues in the hospitality industry. It's also around how you can introduce excellence in some of those fields. So kind of it got me to think about it differently. But we, one of the funniest things I've done recently is launched the groundbreaking of a building with Robert De Niro.
And we all saw that.
Yeah, things that you don't expect to be doing. And I mean, look, and that was the most random of days. Got Robert De Niro in the morning. I was just about to announce that we were becoming the first council in the northwest of England to get outstanding in our Ofsted.
Schools, yeah.
And it was Remembrance Day. So talk about a funny 2 hours,
Sure.
you know, it's quite strange. But I was chatting to some of the guys behind Chef Nobu, this kind of international, you know, fantastic restaurant that's going to open here. And talking to people in the hospitality industry who are actually pinning quite a bit of hope on having some of those big names coming into the city because it's giving secure pathways into excellence within their field. When we know hospitality still suffers from some of the biggest structural problems when it comes to secure and good work. So you know, this is a deep problem. But I think until, you know, we create both better standards in those industries and make clear pathways for Manchester and Greater Manchester people into good quality jobs, we have to be able to do both.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. So we've recently launched the new Greater Manchester strategy. We've also heard last week about the growth plans, the inclusive growth plans. You want to just tell us a little bit about where the strategy is going?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've done really well in GM is that we've insulated ourselves from a lot of the nonsense and turbulence that happens in national politics. And I think it's really rare that politicians have long-term plans, that they actually go out to the public and they present. You know, before I come on to GM, I'll give a Manchester example. So I took over from Sir Richard Leese in 2021, so it's 4 years this December that I've been in the job. And I'd been part of his cabinet beforehand, and we'd launched back in 2015 our 10-year plan for the city. Now, all of the conventional wisdom is that as a politician in a leadership role, you have to assert yourself. And you have to assert yourself by creating your own new plan. So I actually surprised quite a few people and said, well, actually, no, the city has a plan. It wasn't Richard's plan. It's not my plan. It's the city's plan for 10 years. So we refreshed it, but we held our nerve to 2025 and launched the Our Manchester 10-year plan that takes us to 2035. We wanted to do the same again in Greater Manchester, where we're saying, you know, this is, you know, as hard as it is sometimes to say, you know, that it's you know, it's not just about me, it's not just about Andy, you know, this is about a place. But we wanted a 10-year plan, and the Greater Manchester strategy is speaking to a long-term vision for the city region that can't be done overnight. And I think that's what's exciting about it. You know, there are things that we will do in the next 5 years that are clear, that are tangible, but it's about knowing that a place is going somewhere and that we're going to make long-term investment decisions to do that. And I think that's where the GM Good Growth Fund comes in, because, you know, over the years we've had all sorts of different streams of funding, either generated ourselves or brought in from national government. And we were falling into the same old patterns and the same old traps, where we do the same application processes that we always did, or people that put their hands up, or those that were closest to getting it over the line would get it. So we stood back and said, well, what if we pulled all of that together, and then we looked outside and thought, what other money can we bring in? You know, so as a leader, I could spend more time going across the world to get institutional capital from other countries to go into Manchester than sometimes the money that's available from within this country. You know, so what we were doing with our own pension fund here in Greater Manchester, what we're doing with the government's National Wealth Bank. So we wanted one fund that we could then crowd in and bring loads more investment into, which is why we're starting with this £1 billion fund that will be 10 billion over 10 years. But it's doing a whole bunch of different things. It's funding some schemes that will put money back into the pot. They're funding some schemes that couldn't have got over the line without a bit of extra help. And then it's also funding some commercial schemes, which is the first of its kind in the country, that says this will be money that will generate back into our pot. You know, we'll get money back from lending it to them, but we're also able to keep that pipeline of jobs. And what that does is that helps us with that Greater Manchester strategy that says, you know, Middleton needs to do well. Oldham Town Centre needs a hand to kind of get forward with the plans that Arouge and the team have got there. You know, Wythenshawe can be the next big exciting Manchester project that we're talking about that isn't the city centre. Yeah. And some of that will need grant, some of it will just need a hand, and some of it will deliver back in. So I think it's really exciting, especially when you add that in around what we're doing with skills, transport, some of the enablers.
Good jobs.
Absolutely. You know, so for me, and I guess the thing that comes back to me, so as the kind of, you know, the glamorously titled portfolio lead, I think officially it's in the constitution somewhere as the deputy mayor for business, but I think that sounds a bit too grand and a bit too much like a Mandy Skivvy, so I'll stick to my portfolio lead. But the point of that is that the reality is, if you're growing up in Moston or in Charlestown, you need Middleton and Oldham to be doing just as well as you need the city centre. Because chances are you'll look both ways and you'll see opportunities in both places. So this notion that people live by our own local authority boundaries, you know, it's
but is that not part of Greater Manchester's maturity?
Absolutely.
I don't think this could be achieved anywhere else in this country at the moment.
No, I think we're certainly much further ahead, and I think, you know, part of this goes back to many before me and kind of the current crop of leaders that said, well, actually, it makes sense. You know, we'll all have, you know, you can be super proud to be from Salford or super proud to be from Oldham, but the reality is you need Manchester City Centre's economy to do well for the region to thrive. And I think, you know, it was our predecessors that clocked that. So the fact that we've been on lots of different iterations of this journey, even prior to devolution in 2014, I think really shows that it takes time to build some of this, but also it takes a bit of bravery, because the reality is I'm only ever going to be judged at the ballot box, kind of in Burnage and across Manchester, you know. So when people see me banging on about Middleton or Oldham, you know, or Stockport, you know, I don't get any electoral reward for that. No. But the reality is the city region benefits. And I think that's where we're at with the current crop of leaders and the maturity
I think there's a increasing recognition that political and economic geography haven't matched here. No. But, you know, the CA has enabled some of that.
Completely.
In the forefront. I think it happened before anyway. AGMA.
That's what I mean, and you know,
it went on,
and you see it with new mayors that have been created. You know, like Steve Rotherham talks a lot about turning up to his office on day one with a box, a PA, and he had to sort of recruit and build from scratch. Yeah. You know, kind of Andy had before him Tony Lloyd, but before Tony Lloyd, there was a whole AGMA infrastructure that we'd funded and was ready to go. So yeah, I know we're not known for our kind of humbleness in Greater Manchester. But we have been trying to help some of the others in terms of some of the lessons that we've had in our journey as well.
So how do you see you know, the good growth plans? How do you see the charter fitting in with that?
So I think for us, there's a difference, isn't there, when it's your money? And I think, you know, what we've always been good at in this place is thinking about the leverage that we have. And often, you know, when it's private capital, you know, when it's money that's coming from across the globe or it's coming from a big pension fund that's private sector, there's very little that you can do and influence that. We can try through planning, you can try through supply chain, but actually you're able to put a marker down when you're investing your money into something that says, well, this is the principles of what we want to invest in. You know, we did it with the buses and the bus contracting, but it's taken then how we're spending our money in places to the next level that says, well, actually, you know, if you're coming to the CA and you're asking us for 30 million quid, like, mate, the least you can do is look at your supply chain, you know, and embed some of the principles. So we're hoping that it's not just about creating good jobs, but it's using our leverage to get people in on the likes of, you know, the employment charter, the likes of the real living wage, the stuff we've been banging on for a long time, beyond just the immediacy of construction.
Yeah, and construction's still a challenge.
I mean, it is still a challenge, but I think when you speak to, I think there's a way through in some of this. I think is really starting to I suppose inspire me a bit. So one of the best places that I've been out to visit over the last couple of months has been the Colliers Construction Academy, where we've said, right, if you're living in Colliers, if you're living in North Manchester, there's a lot going on in and around kind of the edges. You're about to see Victoria North, an ambitious, 15,000 new homes across 7 new neighbourhoods. You've got the Etihad putting its roof on, building a hotel. You can go to the North Manchester General Hospital, a 1 billion rebuild of a hospital. There will be lots of jobs coming through. But how do you get all of those contractors into one place to actually invest in what the pipeline looks like? And what they've done there with a very small bit of money around getting local people into kind of a pathway, working with some of the big construction providers, that means that they're staying in Manchester, so that construction is able to plan, okay, well, when the Etihad finishes here, that'll be just about the time that they'll begin the work on the North Manchester build. Because I think a lot of the time we've had to import labour and construction from elsewhere, and it's insecure, and the blacklisting challenging, and all of that, so we're trying to force a new way through that says, well, actually, it's not just about till the end of this job. Start to think about what the next job looks like and how you get some consistency in there.
And making sure that contractors give secure work. We were struck, we all should be struck, 700 young men take their lives every year in the construction industry. It's an amazing number. And we've already spoken to the Work Foundation about maybe looking at some research linking insecure work and mental health issues. It almost certainly part of the contributing factors, you would think.
No, completely. And I just think that if we're to get this right, I think when we've thought about skills in the past, we've broken it down too much into sectors. We've thought about housing, we've thought about commercial, we've talked about leisure. We've not just talked about construction. And some of that, I think, is a temptation to focus on kind of the glitzy sort of, well, let's talk about digital and tech, or, did I tell you about my AI jobs? That those kinds of conversations. But actually, there's some really great examples from other countries where they've taken their city plan as to everything they're going to build over the next decade and put that kind of into writing in a way that gives security, that shows that actually this is a pathway through to having a constant supply of good jobs, and could you down the line even get into kind of bridging of contracts and thinking about sort of that, there is a whole piece of work to be done, I think, around construction, but I think showing that there's going to be so many cranes in the sky right across Greater Manchester gives us an opportunity to rethink that. And
the societal benefits of strong work conditions, saves the NHS, saves social care, saves all
completely, and we've
all the services.
Did a chap did a piece for us in the MEN, kind of great guy, single dad, been raising his girls, been out at the labour market, and he's got himself into a construction job. He's been rebuilding, the new roof on the Etihad. He's got a contract that takes him right the way through. Kind of Cisco, a great local kind of supplier in that sense, that are a bit, better in the kind of security space. And he's earning more money than he ever thought he could. So getting it right.
Yeah, and all power
Precisely.
To Bev on that, and we'll obviously swing right behind that and support employers to deliver the good jobs that's needed. We could talk all day.
Not known for my brevity.
No, but really interesting, Bev. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. We finish normally, Bev, with one question. So we'll come to that. And it's about leadership and perhaps who inspired you. So you've got, and you never have, but you'll have an hour in your diary and it's come free and you can have a coffee with anyone. Who would that be?
Oh, God.
Alive or dead?
No, I know. This is, it starts to get really, really tricky in that space, doesn't it? So I'm one of those people where lots of different people have inspired me in different spaces, and you're really, if you could go back in the past and have a coffee with somebody, like, who wouldn't want to speak to Nelson Mandela? There are the obvious ones. But then there's also, for me, kind of, I love taking bits of people that you encounter along the way, and often resilience that you don't often kind of expect to find from people. And I think when I think about my leadership journey, kind of that's some of the stuff that shaped me, where you see kind of the quiet determination of somebody in the background pushing something through just as much as you see the strong man. So it's not a cop-out. It's like but you've got to forge your own. Like the cop-out is to give you an easy answer and like give you a LinkedIn post
it's
of
fine.
like the top 10
It's
people
fine.
you want to have
Every
coffee
politician
with.
we've had on here has never answered this question straight.
But do you know why that is though? Is it like, I think you spend a lot of time not reading books about leadership, but just having to crack on.
No, you're right.
And you know, and I think that there is something for me in the resourcefulness of a single mum that makes her way through every single one of Burnage's Christmas events, thinking, well, that's how I'm going to feed my kids for that weekend. Like, that resourcefulness should be just as inspiring as somebody that's been at the top of their game.
No, you're here. And Bev, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.